Jake Morrison stood in the meeting room of the United Earth Council building, looking at the strangest creatures he had ever seen. The aliens were tall, nearly 8 feet, with hard shells that shined like oil on water. They had 6 legs and long antennae that moved constantly. Their faces were difficult to read, but Jake could tell they were watching him closely. The leader of the aliens stepped forward. His name was Vexthor, and he spoke through a translation device that made his clicking sounds into English words. "We come from the planet Veskara Prime. We have a problem that we believe humans can help us solve." Jake listened as Vexthor explained their situation. On their home planet, there was a creature called the Raveth. These animals were massive predators that ruled the forests. For many generations, the Calthrine people had hunted these beasts as a test of strength and courage. Young warriors proved themselves by tracking and killing a Raveth. But something had changed in recent years. The Raveth population had grown too large. They were coming into Calthrine towns and villages, killing people, destroying homes. The Calthrine had tried to hunt them, but the creatures were too smart, too fast, too dangerous. Dozens of warriors had died trying to stop them. "We have studied your species," Vexthor said. "We have learned about your history of hunting. Your ancestors chased animals for days until they could run no more. You have lived alongside dangerous predators for thousands of years. We believe a human hunter can teach us new ways to deal with the Raveth." The council members looked at each other nervously. This was a strange request. Earth had only made contact with alien species 5 years ago, and now they wanted human help with a wildlife problem on a planet millions of miles away. "What exactly do you want from us?" asked the council chairman. "Send us your best hunter," Vexthor replied. "Someone who understands predators. Someone who can help us stop the Raveth before more of our people die." The council spent 3 days debating who to send. Many suggested soldiers or professional hunters, but Jake's name kept coming up. He had spent 15 years working with dangerous animals. He had tracked mountain lions in the Rocky Mountains, moved problem bears in Alaska, and studied giant lizards in Indonesia. He knew how predators thought and behaved. When they offered him the job, Jake's first response was to laugh. "You want me to go to an alien planet to hunt a creature I've never seen? That sounds insane." But the more he thought about it, the more curious he became. This was a chance to study an alien predator, to see how evolution worked on another world. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. His friend and colleague Lisa Chen thought he was making a mistake. They sat in his office surrounded by photos of animals he had worked with over the years. Bears, wolves, big cats, crocodiles. All dangerous, all beautiful in their own way. "You don't know anything about alien biology," Lisa argued. "What if the air is toxic? What if the Raveth are impossible to track? What if the Calthrine are not telling you everything?" Jake smiled. "Then I'll figure it out. That's what I do, Lisa. I solve problems that everyone else thinks are impossible." Before he left Earth, Jake spent 2 weeks preparing. He studied every piece of information the Calthrine had provided about the Raveth. The creatures were enormous, standing 12 feet tall at the shoulder. They had 6 legs like the Calthrine, covered in dark scales that could stop most weapons. Their jaws were filled with rows of sharp teeth, and they could run faster than any Earth animal their size. But what interested Jake most were the videos the Calthrine had recorded. He watched hours of footage studying how the Raveth moved, how they hunted, how they interacted with each other. He saw things that the Calthrine seemed to have missed. The Raveth were not mindless killing machines. They tilted their heads when they heard new sounds, showing curiosity. They marked their territory by scratching trees with their claws, just like bears on Earth. Mother Raveth guided their young gently, teaching them to hunt and survive. These were intelligent animals, not monsters. Jake packed his equipment carefully. He brought his tranquilizer rifle, not a regular gun. He brought tracking devices, cameras, and notebooks. The Calthrine had asked for a hunter, but Jake had never killed an animal for sport in his life. He studied them, understood them, and found ways to keep both humans and animals safe. The journey to Veskara Prime took 3 weeks on a Calthrine ship. Jake spent the time learning more about the Calthrine culture. They were warriors who valued strength and courage above all else. Hunting the Raveth was their most important ritual. To them, these creatures were the ultimate test of a warrior's skill. Jake wondered if that attitude was part of the problem. If you only saw an animal as an enemy to be killed, you missed everything else about it. When the ship finally arrived at Veskara Prime, Jake pressed his face against the window and stared in wonder. The planet was beautiful but alien. The sky was deep purple, and 2 moons hung in the air even during the day. The forests below were red instead of green, with massive trees that twisted up toward the sky like giant corkscrews. The landing platform was crowded with Calthrine warriors waiting to meet him. They wore ceremonial armor that gleamed in the light of the twin suns overhead. Jake felt small standing among these tall aliens, but he tried not to show his nervousness. Vexthor greeted him with respect, touching his antennae to his chest in a Calthrine salute. "Human Jake Morrison, you honor us with your presence. Tomorrow we begin the Great Hunt. You will join our finest warriors in tracking the most dangerous Raveth on our planet. This alpha male has killed 17 of our people in the past season. It must die." Jake looked out at the red forest beyond the landing platform. Somewhere in there, the creature they wanted him to kill was living its life, probably trying to survive just like everything else. He felt the weight of what he had agreed to do. "Thank you for the welcome, Commander," Jake said carefully. "But before we hunt anything, I need to spend time watching these Raveth. I need to understand what we're dealing with. I need to see how they live, what they eat, why they're coming into your towns." The Calthrine warriors made clicking sounds with their mandibles. They seemed confused by his request. Vexthor tilted his head. A gesture Jake was learning meant the alien was puzzled. "You wish to study the beast before killing it? This is not how we hunt. We track, we fight, we prove our courage." "That's how you hunt," Jake replied. "But you asked me here because your way isn't working. Let me try mine." There was a long silence. The warriors clicked and chittered among themselves, clearly not happy with this strange human's approach. But finally Vexthor nodded. "Very well. You are our guest and we will honor your methods. We will take you to Raveth territory. You may observe as long as you wish. But know this, human. Every day you spend watching is another day the Alpha might kill more of our people." Jake understood the pressure he was under. Lives were at stake, but he also knew that rushing into a situation without understanding it was how people got killed. He had learned that lesson working with dangerous animals on Earth, and he suspected it would be even more important here. That night, Jake lay in the quarters the Calthrine had prepared for him, listening to the strange sounds of an alien world. In the distance, he heard a deep, rumbling roar that made the walls vibrate. The Raveth were out there in the red forests, living their lives, hunting their prey, raising their young. Tomorrow he would meet them. Not as an enemy with a gun, but as an observer trying to understand. The Calthrine wanted him to be a hunter, but Jake had other plans. He had never met a predator he couldn't understand, and he wasn't about to start now, even if that predator was from another world. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that the real challenge was just beginning. The first week in the Red Forest taught Jake that patience was not a Calthrine virtue. The warriors assigned to guard him grew more frustrated each day, as Jake did nothing but watch and take notes. He set up cameras on trees, recorded sounds, and tracked footprints in the strange purple soil. He studied the forest itself, learning which plants the local animals ate and where the water sources were located. Lieutenant Kexmill was the most vocal about his disappointment. The young warrior had volunteered for this assignment, hoping to prove himself in a great hunt. Instead, he spent his days watching a human sit in a blind and stare at empty forest. "This is not hunting," Kexmill complained to the other warriors. "The human does nothing. He watches where the Raveth sleep. He watches where they drink water. He watches where they scratch their claws on trees. This is the behavior of a coward, not a hunter." The other warriors clicked their agreement, but they kept their opinions quiet when Vexthor was around. The commander had begun to see value in Jake's strange methods, even if he didn't fully understand them. On the 8th day, Jake made his first major discovery. He was reviewing footage from his cameras when he noticed something important. The Raveth were coming to the same water source every day, a small stream that ran through a valley. But they weren't just drinking. They were hunting smaller animals that came to drink as well. Jake zoomed in on one particular sequence. A Raveth waited in the shadows near the water. When a herd of large herbivores approached, the predator didn't attack immediately. It watched and waited until one animal separated from the group. Then it struck with incredible speed and precision. The hunt was over in seconds. "They're ambush predators," Jake said to himself. "They use intelligence, not just strength." He showed the footage to Vexthor that evening. The commander watched carefully, his antennae moving slowly as he processed what he was seeing. "We knew the Raveth were dangerous," Vexthor said. This shows us nothing new. Look closer, Jake insisted. See how it waits? See how it picks the weakest target? This isn't random violence. This is calculated hunting. The Raveth aren't attacking your people because they're monsters. They're attacking because they're hungry and desperate. Jake pulled up more data on his tablet. I've been analyzing the forest ecosystem. 3 years ago, there was a disease that killed most of the large herbivores in this region. The Raveth's primary food source disappeared. They started coming into your settlements because that's where the food is now. Your livestock, your stored meat, even your garbage. Vexthor was silent for a long moment. You are saying the Raveth attack us because we are easy prey? I'm saying they attack you because they're starving. A healthy, well-fed predator avoids conflict. It's too risky, but a starving predator will take chances it normally wouldn't. The commander clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. If this is true, then killing the Alpha will not solve our problem. Exactly. Kill one Raveth and another hungry one will take its place. The cycle continues. Over the next week, Jake expanded his observations. He tracked 3 different Raveth groups, documenting their territories and behavior patterns. He discovered that Raveth lived in small family units, usually a mated pair with their offspring. They communicated through low-frequency sounds that Jake could barely hear but could feel in his chest. Most interesting of all, Jake saw evidence of problem-solving intelligence. He watched a young Raveth spend nearly an hour figuring out how to reach fruit growing high in a tree. The creature tried jumping first, failed, then looked around for solutions. Eventually, it dragged a fallen log over and used it as a ramp to reach the fruit. They're smart, Jake told Lisa during their weekly video call to Earth. Maybe not as smart as humans, but definitely more intelligent than most Earth predators. They learn, they adapt, they teach their young. Lisa's face on the screen showed concern. That makes them more dangerous, Jake. Smart predators are unpredictable. Or it makes them possible to work with, Jake replied. Smart animals can learn new behaviors. They can understand consequences. On the 15th day, Jake had his first face-to-face encounter with the Alpha. He was alone, checking one of his camera traps deep in the forest. The Calthrian guards were 50 meters behind him, watching from a distance as he had requested. Jake wanted the Raveth to get used to his presence, and a group of armed warriors would only scare them away. He heard the rumbling sound first. It was deep and powerful, making the ground vibrate slightly. Jake froze, his heart suddenly pounding. He turned slowly and saw the Alpha Raveth standing 20 feet away. The creature was even more impressive in person than in videos. Its scales were almost black, scarred from years of fighting and surviving. Its amber eyes glowed in the filtered light of the red forest. It stood completely still, watching Jake with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Behind him, Jake heard the Calthrian warriors reaching for their weapons. He held up his hand in a stopping gesture, not taking his eyes off the Raveth. If they attacked now, everything would be ruined. Jake remembered his training from working with big cats and bears. Never run. Never show fear. Don't stare directly. Make yourself non-threatening. He slowly crouched down, making himself smaller. He looked at the ground instead of meeting the Raveth's eyes. In predator body language, this meant he was not a threat and not prey. He was just another creature sharing the forest. The Alpha took a step forward, then another. Its massive claws left deep prints in the soil. Jake could smell it now, a strange metallic scent mixed with something earthy. His every instinct screamed at him to run, but he stayed still. The Raveth circled him slowly, its 6 legs moving with surprising grace for such a large animal. It lowered its head and sniffed Jake's hair. Its breath was hot and smelled like old meat. Jake focused on keeping his breathing steady and calm. Then the Alpha made a sound Jake had never heard in any of his recordings. It was a soft rumble, not aggressive or threatening. It sounded almost curious. The creature was asking a question in its own language. Jake took a risk. He slowly extended his hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. This was how you approached a nervous dog. Let them come to you. Let them investigate on their own terms. The Raveth stared at his hand for a long moment. Then it leaned forward and sniffed his fingers carefully. Its nostrils flared, taking in his scent. Jake felt the creature's hot breath on his skin. One wrong move, one sign of fear, and those jaws could take his hand off in an instant. But the Raveth simply pulled back, studied Jake one more time, then turned and walked away into the forest. It disappeared into the red foliage as silently as it had appeared. Jake stayed crouched for another minute, his legs shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Behind him, he heard the Calthrine warriors chattering in shock. Kexmil ran up to him. "The Alpha should have killed you. Why did it spare your life?" Jake stood up slowly, his legs still unsteady. "I wasn't acting like prey. I wasn't threatening it. I was just existing in its space. It was curious about me, that's all." "Curious?" Kexmil clicked his mandibles in disbelief. "The Raveth do not get curious. They hunt or they leave. Nothing else. Maybe you've never given them a chance to show you anything else," Jake suggested. That night, Jake compiled all his data into a comprehensive report. He had video footage, tracking data, behavioral observations, and ecological analysis. He requested a meeting with Vexthor and the Calthrine Council of Elders. The presentation took place in a large chamber carved from dark stone. A dozen elderly Calthrine sat in a semicircle, their ancient shells dull with age. Vexthor stood beside Jake as he showed his findings on a holographic display. "The Raveth population has grown because their natural food sources have collapsed," Jake explained, showing graphs and charts. "They're not evil. They're not monsters. They're animals trying to survive in a damaged ecosystem." He pulled up footage of Raveth families, showing cubs playing while their parents kept watch. "Look at this. They care for their young. They work together. They're intelligent and social. These are not mindless killing machines." Elder Vorthak, the oldest Calthrine in the chamber, spoke in a creaking voice. "What do you suggest, human? That we feed the beasts that kill our children?" "I suggest we fix the ecosystem," Jake replied. "Restore the herbivore population. Give the Raveth a stable food source in their own territory. Create buffer zones between your settlements and their hunting grounds. If we do this right, the attacks will stop naturally." "And if you are wrong?" Vorthak asked. "If we spend resources on this plan and our people continue to die?" "Then we try something else," Jake said honestly. "But I don't think I'm wrong. Every piece of data I've collected supports this theory. The Raveth don't want to fight you. They want to hunt in peace, raise their families, and survive. Right now, your settlements are the only place they can find enough food. Change that and they'll leave you alone." The council debated for hours. Some elders wanted to proceed with the traditional Great Hunt. Others saw wisdom in Jake's approach. Finally, they reached a compromise. "You will have 3 months," Vexthor announced. "Prove that your methods work. Show us that the Raveth can be managed without hunting them to extinction. But if attacks continue, the Great Hunt will begin." Jake nodded. 3 months wasn't much time, but it was better than nothing. He already had a plan forming in his mind. If he could, Jake knew that 3 months was not much time to change thousands of years of Calthrine culture. He needed to do something that had never been done before. He needed to form a working relationship with the Alpha Raveth. The idea sounded crazy even to him. Back on Earth, he had worked with wolves and bears, teaching them to avoid human settlements. He had helped relocate problem animals and study their behavior. But this was different. This was an alien predator on an alien world, and everything he knew about animal behavior might not apply here. Still, Jake had seen intelligence in those amber eyes. He had watched the Raveth problem solve and communicate. If they were smart enough to learn, they were smart enough to cooperate. He started by mapping the Alpha's territory. Using his tracking equipment and camera footage, Jake identified a range of about 40 square miles that the Alpha seemed to control. Within that territory, there were preferred hunting grounds, water sources, and what appeared to be a den site where the Alpha's family lived. Jake set up his permanent camp at the edge of this territory. The location was carefully chosen. It was close enough that the Alpha would notice his presence, but far enough that it wouldn't feel immediately threatened. The Calthrine guards thought he was insane. "You want to live next to the Alpha's den?" Kexmil asked in disbelief. "It will kill you in your sleep." "If it wanted me dead, I'd already be dead," Jake replied. "It had the perfect chance when we met in the forest. Instead, it just walked away." Every morning, Jake left offerings of food near his camp. He used meat from the livestock the Calthrine raised. Fresh kills from the forest, anything that might interest the Alpha. At first, the offerings went untouched. Jake suspected the Raveth was being cautious, watching from a distance to understand what this strange human was doing. On the 5th day, Jake woke to find the meat gone. There were massive claw marks in the soil where the Alpha had approached during the night. Progress. Jake continued the routine. Every morning, fresh food. Every day, he sat outside his camp doing normal activities. He ate his meals, wrote in his notebooks, checked his equipment. He wanted the Alpha to see that he was predictable and non-threatening, just another part of the landscape. 2 weeks into this routine, Jake had his breakthrough. He was eating his breakfast when he heard the now familiar rumbling sound. The Alpha emerged from the forest and walked directly to the pile of meat Jake had left. This time, instead of taking the food and leaving, the Raveth began to eat right there. Jake continued eating his own meal, careful not to stare or make sudden movements. He could see the Alpha in his peripheral vision, its powerful jaws tearing through the meat with ease. When the Raveth finished eating, it didn't leave immediately. Instead, it settled down on the ground, its massive body relaxing. The creature sat there for nearly an hour, just existing in the same space as Jake. This was bigger than Jake had hoped for. The Alpha was comfortable enough to eat and rest near a human. That showed a level of trust that most wild predators never developed. Jake decided to give the Alpha a name. Smoke. The dark scales reminded him of smoke from a fire, and it felt right somehow. This wasn't just a research subject anymore. This was an individual with its own personality and behaviors. Over the following weeks, Smoke returned every day. The visits became longer and more relaxed. Jake started talking to the creature in a low, calm voice. It didn't matter that Smoke couldn't understand English. The tone was what mattered. Gentle, non-threatening, friendly. He also began studying Smoke's body language more carefully. The way the Raveth held its head meant different things. Ears forward meant alertness. A slight tilt meant curiosity. A lowered head with eyes half closed meant relaxation and comfort. Jake recorded all of this, building a dictionary of Raveth communication. One morning, Jake tried something risky. When Smoke arrived for the daily meal, Jake didn't leave the food on the ground. Instead, he held a piece of meat in his hand and slowly extended his arm. Smoke stopped and stared at the offering. The creature's amber eyes moved from the meat to Jake's face and back again. Jake could almost see it thinking, weighing the risk against the reward. The tension was incredible. Jake kept his breathing steady, his arm extended but relaxed. He wasn't forcing anything. He was simply offering a choice. Finally, Smoke took 3 slow steps forward. The Raveth lowered its massive head and gently took the meat from Jake's hand. Its teeth never touched his skin, even though they easily could have. The creature pulled back, chewed the meat, and made a soft rumbling sound that Jake was learning meant contentment. Kex Mill, who had been watching from a safe distance, ran to the camp after Smoke left. "This is impossible." You fed the Alpha by hand. "The Raveth cannot be tamed. They are killers." "He's not tamed," Jake corrected. "Smoke is choosing to interact with me because I provide food and I'm not a threat." There's a big difference between taming and cooperating, but even Jake had to admit that something special was happening. Over the next month, his relationship with Smoke deepened in ways he hadn't expected. The Alpha started bringing his mate and 2 cubs to the feeding area. Jake watched as the family interacted, the cubs wrestling playfully while their parents kept watch. The cubs were about 6 months old, Jake estimated, still clumsy but full of energy. They were curious about Jake, approaching closer than their parents would allow at first. Smoke would rumble a warning, and the cubs would retreat. But gradually, even Smoke's mate and cubs grew comfortable with Jake's presence. He gave them names, too. The mate was Shadow because her scales were slightly lighter than Smoke's. The cubs were Scout and Runner, named for their distinct personalities. Scout was curious and bold. Runner was faster and more cautious. Jake started using positive reinforcement training techniques he had developed working with other large predators. When Smoke came at a specific time, he got extra food. When the Raveth stayed calm around Jake's equipment, he got rewarded. It was slow, patient work that required consistency and understanding. The most significant moment came when Jake introduced the tracking collar. The Calthrine scientists had designed a lightweight device that wouldn't bother the Raveth, but would allow Jake to monitor Smoke's movements in real time. Getting an alien apex predator to wear a collar was not easy. Jake spent 2 full weeks conditioning Smoke to accept it. First, he let the Raveth investigate the collar, sniff it, get used to its presence. Then he would briefly touch the collar to Smoke's neck during feeding, immediately following with a high-value food reward. Gradually, Smoke associated the collar with good things. The creature's natural caution decreased. On the 15th attempt, Jake was able to secure the collar around Smoke's thick neck. The Raveth shook its head a few times, testing the new sensation, then simply went back to eating. The tracking data proved invaluable. Jake could now see exactly where Smoke and his family went throughout the day. The patterns were clear. When properly fed at Jake's camp, the Raveth stayed deep in the forest, far from Calthrine settlements. They hunted small prey in their territory, taught their cubs survival skills, and avoided areas where Calthrine were active. But Jake also noticed concerning patterns in the data from other Raveth groups. There were at least 6 other family units in the region, and several were still approaching settlements regularly. These groups hadn't learned to trust humans yet. They were still desperate and dangerous. Jake presented his findings to Vexthor during one of their regular meetings. Smoke's family has stopped attacking settlements completely, but we need to extend this program to other Raveth groups. We need multiple feeding stations, more observation posts, more people trained in these methods. You ask for much, Vexthor observed. Resources, personnel, time. The council grows impatient. There was another incident last week. A young female Raveth injured 3 Calthrine workers at a farming outpost. I know, Jake said quietly, and I'm sorry. But this proves my point. That female is probably starving. If we can establish feeding stations in her territory too, she'll stop attacking your people. Vexthor clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps. But you have built trust with only one Raveth family. How do you know others will respond the same way? It was a fair question, and Jake didn't have a perfect answer. Every animal was different. What worked with Smoke might not work with other Raveth, but he had to try. That evening, Jake sat by his campfire, writing in his journal. Smoke lay nearby in his usual spot, visible in the firelight. The other family members were deeper in the forest, but Jake could hear their occasional rumbles of communication. We're making progress, Jake said aloud, knowing Smoke couldn't understand the words but might recognize the calm tone. But it's not enough yet. I need to show the Calthrine that this can work on a larger scale. I need other Raveth to trust me the way you do. Smoke lifted his massive head and looked at Jake. Those amber eyes reflected the firelight, making them glow even brighter. The creature made a soft, questioning rumble. Jake smiled. Yeah, I know. I'm asking a lot. From you, from your species, from mine. But I think we can do this. I think we can prove that humans and Raveth can share this world without killing each other. The Raveth stood up, stretched its 6 legs one at a time, then walked over to Jake. For the first time, Smoke voluntarily approached without food being offered. The Create. The incident happened on day 73 of Jake's 3-month deadline. A young female Raveth, thin and desperate, broke through the perimeter fence of a Calthrine school. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes, but 3 children were injured before guards drove the creature away with sonic weapons. Jake heard about it within an hour. He was at his camp with Smoke when Vexthor's emergency call came through on his communicator. The commander's voice was tight with anger and grief. The council meets tonight. They are calling for the great hunt to begin immediately. I do not know if I can stop them, human. The people demand action. Jake felt his stomach drop. 3 children hurt. He had been so focused on his work with Smoke that he hadn't moved fast enough to protect the other Raveth groups. Now innocent people had paid the price for his slow progress. He looked at Smoke, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. The Raveth tilted his head, sensing Jake's distress. I have to go, Jake said, grabbing his equipment. Stay here, Smoke. Keep your family safe. The council meeting was the most hostile Jake had experienced. Dozens of Calthrine filled the chamber, many of them parents whose children attended the attacked school. Their angry chittering created a deafening wall of sound. Elder Vorthak stood at the center, his ancient frame shaking with emotion. You promised us safety, human. You said your methods would stop the attacks, but our children bled today while you played with your pet monster. This experiment is over. The great hunt begins at dawn. Jake tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd. Vexthor had to physically stand beside him, using his authority to create enough silence for Jake to be heard. I know you're angry, Jake began. I know you're scared. But killing Raveth won't solve the underlying problem. That female who attacked the school was starving. I saw the tracking data. She hasn't eaten a proper meal in over a week. She was desperate. So we should pity the creature that hurt our young, someone shouted from the crowd. No, Jake replied firmly. We should fix the system that made her desperate. I need more time. I need resources to establish feeding stations throughout the region. I need to expand what worked with Smoke to work with all the Raveth families. You have had time, Vorthak said coldly. You have had resources. You have failed. The council voted. It wasn't even close. The Great Hunt would begin in 2 days, giving families time to prepare and warriors time to gather their weapons. Hundreds of Calthrine would sweep through the forest, killing every Raveth they could find. Jake left the council chamber feeling defeated. He had failed. All his work with Smoke, all the progress they had made, it was going to end in mass slaughter. Both species would suffer for it. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He paced around his camp, thinking desperately. There had to be a way to fix this. There had to be a solution that didn't end with Smoke and his family dead. Then around midnight, an idea came to him. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it might be the only chance he had left. Before dawn, Jake entered the forest alone. He didn't tell the Calthrine guards where he was going. He didn't bring weapons or protection. He brought only his communicator and his knowledge of Raveth vocalizations. Jake walked deep into the territory where multiple Raveth families lived. He stopped in a clearing and began making the low-frequency rumbles he had learned from studying Smoke. He was calling them. All of them. This was the dangerous part. Jake had built trust with one Raveth family, but there were 5 other groups in this region, and they had never met him before. They had no reason to trust a human, every reason to see him as a threat. The first Raveth to arrive was Smoke. The Alpha emerged from the trees, making concerned, rumbling sounds. He approached Jake and bumped his shoulder hard as if to say, "What are you doing here?" "I need your help," Jake said quietly. "I need you to trust me one more time." Then the other Raveth began to appear. A large female with a scarred face. A young male, barely adult. An older Alpha with graying scales. They emerged from the shadows one by one, surrounding Jake in the clearing. Jake forced himself to stay calm. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He was standing in the middle of 6 apex predators who could tear him apart in seconds. Smoke stepped between Jake and the other Raveth. The Alpha made a series of complex vocalizations, rumbles, and growls that meant something in their language. The other Raveth responded, creating a conversation Jake couldn't fully understand but could feel the importance of. He was asking them to listen, to trust, to understand. Jake began making the gestures he had practiced with Smoke, pointing toward the direction of Calthrine settlements, then making sounds of distress. He was trying to communicate something complex. Those places were dangerous now. Going there meant death. The other Raveth watched, their amber eyes reflecting the early morning light filtering through the red canopy. Jake repeated the gestures, the sounds, trying to make himself clear. Then he did something he had never attempted before. He projected images from his tablet, holographic displays showing Calthrine warriors with weapons, showing Raveth being hunted, showing the danger that was coming. The Raveth stared at the images. Some made nervous rumbles, others backed away slightly, but they were watching. They were learning. Smoke vocalized again to the others, a long series of sounds that felt like explanation or instruction. The other Raveth responded in kind. It was communication. True communication between predators about territory and survival. Jake spent hours in that clearing, surrounded by 7 adult Raveth and several cubs who had followed their parents. He showed them images of safe territories, of the feeding stations he wanted to establish, of the boundaries that would keep both Calthrine and Raveth safe. He didn't know if they understood everything, but he could see they were listening. They were intelligent enough to recognize patterns, to understand cause and effect. When the suns rose fully above the horizon, something remarkable happened. The scarred female approached Jake directly. She was the one who had attacked the school, he realized. She was thin, her ribs showing through her scales. Jake slowly reached into his pack and pulled out the emergency rations he had brought. Dried meat, nutrient bars, everything he had. He offered it to her with an outstretched hand. The female stared at the food, then at Jake. She made a low, questioning rumble. Jake kept his hand steady, kept his posture non-threatening. Finally, the female took the food gently from his hand. She ate quickly, desperately. When she finished, she made a different sound. Not aggressive or threatening, almost grateful. By midday, Jake returned to the Calthrine settlement. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, but cautiously hopeful. He found Vexthor in the command center organizing the great hunt. "Call it off," Jake said without preamble. "Impossible. The council has decided. The warriors are already assembling. Then give me 24 hours. Just one day. Track the Raveth movements. I think something has changed." Vexthor studied Jake with his multifaceted eyes. "What did you do, human?" "Something crazy. Something that shouldn't have worked." "But I think it did." The commander was silent for a long moment. Then he clicked his mandibles in what Jake had learned was reluctant agreement. "One day. But if there is another attack, the hunt proceeds immediately." Jake spent that day monitoring the tracking data obsessively. Smoke's collar showed his movements, and Jake had managed to place trackers near the other Raveth territories during his morning visit. The patterns were changing. The Raveth were staying deeper in the forest away from settlements. The scarred female, who had been approaching the farming outpost daily, was now moving in the opposite direction. 24 hours passed without incident. Then 48. Then 72. Vexthor came to Jake's camp on the 4th day. "What happened in that forest?" "My scouts report seeing you surrounded by Raveth. They were certain you would be killed. I asked them to help me," Jake said simply, "and somehow they understood." Smoke communicated with the others. "They're avoiding your settlements now. Not because they're tamed, but because they understand the danger." "This should not be possible," Vexthor said, but there was wonder in his voice rather than disbelief. "A lot of things shouldn't be possible," Jake replied, "but that doesn't make them any less real." The council agreed to postpone the great hunt indefinitely. Jake was given authorization to establish a comprehensive conservation program. Feeding stations, monitoring posts, trained personnel, everything he had asked for months ago. But the real victory was simpler. It was watching Smoke's family play in the forest without fear of being hunted. It was seeing the scarred female teach her own cubs to hunt, healthy now with regular meals. It was knowing that two intelligent species had found a way to share a world without destroying each other. Jake sat by his campfire that night, Smoke resting nearby as usual. "We did it, buddy. We actually did it." The Raveth lifted his head and made a soft rumbling sound. In the darkness beyond the firelight, Jake could hear other Raveth families moving through the forest, not with fear or desperation, but with the calm purpose of predators who knew they were safe. For the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to believe they might actually succeed. 6 months after the crisis at the school, Jake stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the 5th Raveth feeding station. The structure was simple but effective, designed by human engineers and Calthrine architects working together. Automated dispensers would provide supplemental food during lean seasons, while monitoring systems tracked Raveth health and movements. Lisa Chen had arrived from Earth 2 weeks earlier, with a team of conservation specialists. She stood beside Jake now, shaking her head in continued disbelief. "I still can't believe this is real. You actually created a working partnership with an alien apex predator. Do you know how many scientific papers are going to be written about this?" Jake smiled. "As long as those papers help other worlds avoid the mistakes we almost made here, I'm happy." The Calthrine turnout for the ceremony was impressive. Hundreds of citizens had come to see the station, including many who had initially opposed Jake's methods. Even Elder Vorthok was present, his ancient frame supported by younger warriors. But the most remarkable attendees were the Raveth themselves. Smoke and his family watched from the forest edge, clearly visible but maintaining a respectful distance. Other Raveth families were scattered throughout the area, their amber eyes glowing in the shade of the red trees. The sight of predators and prey species peacefully occupying the same space would have been unthinkable a year ago. Now it was becoming normal. Vexthor gave a speech praising the cooperation between species and the success of the conservation program. He acknowledged the Calthrine's initial skepticism and thanked Jake for his patience in teaching them a new way. "We were warriors who knew only how to fight our enemies," Vexthor said, his voice amplified across the gathering. "Human Jake Morrison taught us that not all problems require violence. Sometimes the strongest action is understanding. The bravest choice is cooperation." After the ceremony, Jake walked into the forest to check on Smoke. The alpha was teaching his cubs to hunt, demonstrating how to track small prey through the undergrowth. Scout and Runner were much larger now, almost half their father's size, but still playful and curious. Smoke noticed Jake's approach and rumbled a greeting. The cubs bounded over immediately, making happy chirping sounds that younger Raveth used. They had grown up around Jake and showed no fear of humans. "Your kids are getting big," Jake said, running his hand along Scout's neck. The young Raveth leaned into the touch, clearly enjoying the attention. Shadow emerged from deeper in the forest carrying a small kill in her jaws. She had become an excellent hunter, providing for the family even when the feeding stations offered easy meals. The Raveth weren't becoming dependent on human help. They were using it as a supplement while maintaining their natural behaviors. That was the key to the program's success. Jake hadn't tried to change what the Raveth were. He had simply given them options that didn't involve conflict with Calthrine settlements. Over the following weeks, Jake focused on training Calthrine volunteers in his methods. It was challenging work. The Calthrine mindset was fundamentally different from human thinking. They saw everything through the lens of honor and combat. Teaching them to value observation and patience required breaking down cultural barriers that had existed for thousands of years. Kexmil became Jake's most dedicated student. The young warrior approached Jake one morning with an unusual request. "I wish to work with the Raveth as you do. I want to understand them as you understand smoke." Jake was surprised but pleased. "It's not easy work. It requires patience, and I know that's not a traditional Calthrine strength." "You have shown us that tradition is not always correct," Kexmil replied. "I was wrong about you, human. I thought you were a coward for not hunting, but I see now that it takes greater courage to build trust than to simply kill." Jake spent months training Kexmil and a small group of other Calthrine volunteers. He taught them how to read Raveth body language, how to use positive reinforcement, how to establish feeding stations and monitor populations. It was exhausting work, but necessary. When Jake eventually returned to Earth, the Calthrine would need to maintain these programs themselves. The real test came when Kexmil successfully established contact with a Raveth family on his own. Jake watched from a distance as the young warrior offered food to a cautious female. The Raveth approached slowly, took the food, and didn't flee. Kexmil maintained perfect calm throughout the interaction. "You did well," Jake told him afterward. "You're a natural at this." Kexmil clicked his mandibles in pleasure. "I begin to understand what you meant about respecting the predator. The female was not my enemy today. She was simply another being trying to survive." The conservation program expanded steadily. By the end of Jake's first year on Veskara Prime, there were 12 feeding stations, 20 trained personnel, and a comprehensive monitoring network covering the entire Raveth population. Attacks on settlements had dropped to 0. The Raveth population was stable and healthy, but Jake also noticed something unexpected. The relationship between Calthrine and Raveth was evolving beyond simple coexistence. Some Calthrine, particularly the younger generation, had developed genuine affection for the creatures that had once been their mortal enemies. Children visited the feeding stations to watch the Raveth from safe observation platforms. Artists created sculptures and paintings celebrating the creatures. Scientists studied their intelligence and social structures. The Raveth were becoming a symbol of Calthrine's new philosophy: strength through understanding rather than dominance through violence. One afternoon, Jake received a message from the United Earth Council. They wanted him to return home and apply his methods to wildlife conflicts on Earth and other newly contacted worlds. His work on Veskara Prime had attracted attention throughout human space. Jake sat by his camp that evening, considering the offer. Smoke lay nearby, as he had done for hundreds of nights now. The Alpha had become more than a research subject or even a friend. He was a partner in creating something bigger than either of them. "I have to go eventually," Jake said aloud. "You understand that, right? I can't stay here forever." Smoke lifted his massive head and looked at Jake with those intelligent amber eyes. The Raveth made a soft questioning rumble, the sound that meant concern or curiosity. "The Calthrine can handle things now. Kexmil and the others know what they're doing. You'll be safe. Your cubs will grow up in a world where they don't have to fear being hunted." The Raveth stood and walked over to Jake. Smoke lowered his head and pressed it against Jake's chest, a gesture of affection Jake had seen countless times between Raveth family members. Jake wrapped his arms around the creature's neck, feeling the cool scales under his hands. "I'll miss you too, buddy." The decision to stay for another year was easy. Jake wanted to see Scout and Runner reach adulthood. He wanted to ensure the conservation program was truly sustainable. And honestly, he wanted more time with Smoke and the family he had come to love. The second year brought new challenges and triumphs. The herbivore population began recovering, reducing the Raveth's dependence on feeding stations. Young Raveth were born who had never known a time when humans and Calthrine were enemies. The forest ecosystem was healing. Jake also witnessed Smoke's leadership within the Raveth community. The Alpha had become something like an ambassador for his species, teaching other Raveth families to trust the feeding stations and respect the boundaries. It was remarkable to watch an animal take on such a complex social role. The turning point came during Jake's 18th month on Veskera Prime. Scout, now nearly full-grown, established his own territory and began courting a young female from another family. Jake watched the courtship process with fascination, taking notes on Raveth social dynamics that no human had ever observed before. When Scout and his new mate produced their first cub, Jake was there to witness it. The tiny Raveth, no bigger than a house cat, made squeaking sounds as its parents cleaned and protected it. This cub would never know a time when Raveth and Calthrine were at war. It represented a new generation born into peace. The Calthrine held a celebration honoring Jake's second-year anniversary on their world. Elder Vorthak, who had once been his harshest critic, presented him with the Crystal of Balance, their highest civilian honor. The award was given to individuals who created harmony between opposing forces. "You came to our world as a hunter," Vorthak said during the ceremony, "but you showed us that the greatest hunts end not with death but with understanding. You have changed our culture forever, human. For this we are grateful." Jake accepted the award humbly. "I didn't do this alone. Vexthor believed in me when others didn't. Kexmill and the volunteers did the hard work of changing their culture. And Smoke taught me that intelligence and compassion exist throughout the universe, not just in humans." As if summoned by his name, Smoke appeared at the edge of the gathering. The massive Raveth had learned that ceremonial events meant food and attention. Several Calthrine children ran up to him, giggling as they offered treats. Smoke took the food gently, his movements careful around the small beings. Lisa pulled Jake aside during the reception. "So have you decided? Are you coming back to Earth or staying here permanently?" Jake looked at Smoke, surrounded by Calthrine children who showed no fear. He looked at Kexmill, who was explaining Raveth behavior to a group of students. He looked at the red foal,